So Jeremy, let's look at the Scrum artifacts. There are 3 Scrum artifacts. These are product backlog, sprint backlog, and burndown chart. So let's look at the product backlog. Product backlog is a list of user stories collected by the product owner by talking to the users and stakeholders. And one of the most important thing about the product backlog is actually prioritize. So the highest priority items are on the top and the lowest priority are in the bottom. And this is an ever increasing list because the wishes and the needs of the user are infinite, right?
Yep.
So it's up to the product owner on the regular basis. Product owner will update this and put the highest priority items on the top. And this is where the Scrum team can pull the stories from the top because they know that those are the highest priority items. So the product backlog should reflect the product vision. What are they trying to build? The product backlog should have a pretty good sequence on how products should be built.
Share all the needs of the business. The huge, long laundry list of the needs, the wants, the shoulds, the coulds, right?
100%.
And then you kind of mentioned that the team then selects ones that are on the top. And so we kind of talked about the product backlog. So let's transition that into like a sprint backlog.
Yep, that is the second artifact. So we have the prioritized list of user stories that is called the product backlog that that the product owner owns. So in one of the Scrum ceremonies, which is sprint planning, this is what a product owner comes up with. He comes with the product backlog, highest priority items, and he says these are the top 15 highest priority items. Scrum team, let's discuss these. Let's just look at the user stories. How many of these can we get done in this iteration or the sprint? And if it's a 2-week iteration, the team is thinking in a way, the developers are thinking in a way where, okay, we have 2 weeks, and we have to, whatever story that we say yes to, we have to get this to done.
Yeah, we have to fully define it, design it, build it, test it, get it ready.
And it should work. And, it has acceptance criteria too. So for them to understand what's the scope of the user story. At the end of the sprint, they will demo this work. They will almost show it to the user base of the stakeholders. So that is your sprint backlog.
Awesome. So those are the committed user stories that will be completed in that sprint.
100%.
Based on what the team says, yes, this is what we can do.
Yep. And who owns the sprint backlog? That would be the team.
And then the way that the team can keep control of that brings us to the last artifact, which we've already demoed and showed a lot about it, but talk a little bit about the burndown chart.
Yeah. So let me back off and
Sure.
actually let's talk about how do they come up with this sprint backlog. In the sprint backlog, whenever they pull these stories, they do something called an estimation. And basically what they're using this Fibonacci series that we talked about in the lecture earlier, and they're giving you these points to show how complex is this user story, right? So if it's very complicated user story, and if it's, let's say, an 8, then the team knows they can only work on so many user stories in this sprint. So also the estimation happens, and then after that, they have a clear picture on how many very complicated stories they have, how many easy user stories they have, and how many like medium stories that they have. And they feel much better about committing to those stories based on the discussion that happened with the product owner and among the team.
Awesome. So as we're working through those stories and stuff throughout the sprint, and stories are started getting checked off, the last artifact helps to ensure that the team is on track. That they're going to actually get these stories done at the end of the sprint. Or if they're not, let's put some red flags up before we get to day 13 of a 2-week sprint.
Yeah, and then we talk about the estimation and story points, right?
Yep.
So a lot of the teams are actually going away from estimation in hours, and they're using story points. And so
which is more of like a relative estimate rather than an exact. It's not going to take us 10 hours or 2 days. It's relative.
100%. So they say, let's say they have 30 story points instead of 30 hours, right? They have 30 story points that they committed to. Now, as they start their sprint, how does that burning of the work looks like? So how many points did they burn today? Like, let's say in the first few days of the sprint, they're just really doing the sprint planning, and then it might take them a few days to finish the user story. Let's say they finish 5 points worth of user story. So then from 30, it goes to 25 because they just finished 5. And then, so it just, in that 2 weeks, let's say it's a 2-week sprint, it shows how the team is burning and completing the user story, and you can see this nice graph. And then there's also a graph that it can be shown in any tool on how they should burn.
What the trend should be.
Should be if they want to finish this work in 2 weeks, if that's what they chose as an iteration for their team.
Absolutely. Awesome.
So what are some of the things that you've done for estimation?
So there's a lot of different estimation techniques, and I think the big thing to realize in Scrum is that it's relative estimation. So we kind of alluded to that a little bit. Waterfall and a lot of other techniques are going to be based on hours or days 100%. To complete the task, where that's not the concern from a Scrum or an Agile standpoint. You want to know, okay, about how long do we think this is going to take us, so we know what number of user stories we can put together as part 100%. Of that. So I worked a lot with the Fibonacci sequence. Also worked with t-shirt sizes. Those are the two big ones I've seen in a lot of organizations, and I've seen some other, there's hundreds of them that people use, so I've seen some other ones, but really it's the same concept. Fibonacci's putting the points towards it to then say how big it is, relative size based on the other user stories.
Yeah, and then let's talk about the abstract points, like 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. These are weird abstract numbers, but that's what Fibonacci series is.
It's following the Fibonacci sequence, which says the next number will be a sum of the previous two numbers. So 1 and 2, these are the 3, you have the 2 and the 3, that's a 5. 5 and 3 and 8. And I think the big reason that the Fibonacci works well for estimation for this is the bigger you get, the more complex you get, the more unknown there is, and the more challenge that's going to be coming. So a 5 versus an 8, that's only one step up. But that's 3 numbers, because once you get to that 8, now it's a little bit bigger. There's a little bit more things that could come up that you need to account for. And if you get up to the next step after 8 is 13. So that's a huge jump, compared to the earlier it's 1, 2, 3. So
and then what the teams do is they actually split that 13 points into multiple stories.
Yeah, you want to split them up. You want to keep them small. And that's where a lot of like the other ones, like the t-shirt sizes and the bus and some of the other estimation techniques, they're really there to identify. They're not really caring how big they are. They're just there to identify which ones are too big, that can't be attacked in one sprint, and it can't be completed in one sprint. Well, then let's take that and let's break it up into user stories that are smaller, that can be completed in one sprint. 100%. Because we need to be delivering that value every sprint.
I've definitely been in teams where teams have kind of struggled a little bit to just understand these abstract points, but once they get it that hey, it's a lot about, don't think in terms of hours, think about more of a complexity, and once they've gotten it after a sprint, 2 sprint, they've kind of gone with it.
And at the beginning of the project is usually the hardest part, right? Because you're basing it on, when I say it's a relative estimate, it means it's basing it on other user stories. Oh, we're going to change the label on this one form. Well, that's a 1-pointer, right? Well, then the next one, we're adding a new tab to the form. Okay, well, that's more complex. It's definitely not a 1. It's a 2 or it's a 3. And you're constantly looking back at the one that you previously estimated to do it. So the first couple sometimes can be a little hard for a team to kind of find the best way to do their numbering. And some different teams do it a little different. Some go towards the lower end or go towards the higher end. But it's just it's relative estimated.
And in that point, I just want to bring up something where, a big no-no in the Agile or Scrum is not comparing the story points or the story velocity. How many stories that they finish in a sprint with another team, because it's literally made up points. It doesn't mean anything.
My story points might be all higher than yours, but it doesn't matter because relatively that works for me and the team understands what to expect, and the same thing for the team you're working on. And you can't compare project to project, even with the same team or across teams.
Let's say we are building t-shirt and we're building extra small, medium, large. And it's really simple. Everybody wears t-shirts.
Everybody can understand how that works. They can understand
there, and that's a good way to get a team going on estimation.
It's usually one of the first estimation techniques that's used, or it's very similar for an immature Scrum team.
And then what do they do with the points? And they come up with velocity. So why don't you talk about what a velocity is for a Scrum team?
Sure. So team velocity is really the amount of points that a team can complete in a sprint. And again, when a team is newer, when a project newer, this is going to be a guess at first. And really it's because it could be, we can complete 18 points, we can complete 25 points, we can complete 30 points, we can complete 40 points. Depends on the size of the team, how long the sprints are, how complex, and the relative sizing, right? Because some teams estimate higher, estimate lower, and so your velocity is going to be higher or lower. So the velocity really says, what is the average number of points that you can complete in a given sprint, and that's your team velocity. So if your velocity is 25 points, well then every sprint in your sprint planning, you're choosing up to 25 points based on your relative sizing, and you're selecting those over and committing to them for the sprint. And that way you're not committing blindly to say, oh, well, yeah, we can do these 12 user stories. Oh, could you really do this 13 one? We really need it. Sure, we'll do that one. And that's just a blind commitment. At least use the points to give you a relative understanding of how long it's going to take.
100%, because a 10 user story might be 80 points or 30 points.
Yeah,
if there's a lot of complex stories, then we know that you cannot do that many user stories in that 2 weeks iteration.
Yep, so that team velocity is really just understanding how that works. And really it only works for like a Fibonacci sequence, one that uses numbers. Can't really get into too much team velocity with the t-shirt size. It gets a lot more difficult, I should say, because there's no way to real measure it. Some teams will say, we can take 1 medium, 10 smalls, and 3 extra smalls, but it's kind of up in the air.